O. Because as a geologist, he understood instantly the historical implications of a water-weathered sphinx, which are indeed profound.
The geologist from Oxford didn't want to be associated with West and his controversial ideas. But after years of searching for a friendly geologist, John West finally met Professor Robert Schoch of Boston University.
Those tests show that it's older than
Limestone rocks like those of the Sphinx are Robert Schoch's speciality. He lectures and writes textbooks on rock formations and how their appearance is changed over time by weather. He had the expertise to analyze the Sphinx rocks and say what had eroded them and when. And unlike other geologists whom West had approached, he was open-minded about West's unorthodox background. In Egypt, West took Schoch to investigate every possible piece of evidence. The temples in front of the Sphinx were as important to his theory as the great statue itself.
This is what I mean by the two-stage construction, Schoch. You see the huge limestone core blocks that come from the Sphinx enclosure and the granite sheathing, which has clearly been added afterwards. The same over here. You see the granite sheathing and the
West's idea was that the temples, like the Sphinx, were found in ruins by the ancient Egyptians and were repaired and refaced in the time of Khephren. But the clues Robert Schoch needed to verify the theories would come not from inside the monuments, but from studying the natural bedrock formations outside on the plateau. The Sphinx is carved out of one solid piece of limestone bedrock, and quarrying the stone from around it has left a kind of square enclosure on either side. The walls of this enclosure are exactly the same rocks as the core body of the statue, alternate soft and hard layers of limestone, heavily eroded. The erosion on these walls has never been repaired or covered as it has on the statue, and can easily be examined today. A geologist looks for erosion features in the weakest parts of a rock. With rain erosion, the softer layers are hollowed back in a rounded shape, and the natural rock fractures are deeply gouged.
This is the wall of the Sphinx enclosure, which was carved out at the same time as the body of the Sphinx itself, so they're the same age. What we see here is a very typical rain-produced weathering feature that gives a nice rolling profile. You haven't had rain in this area for at least 5,000 years, at least rain to the extent that would cause this type of weathering feature. That clearly indicates to me that if this was caused by such amounts of rain, and you haven't had it for over 5,000 years, this wall must have been here more than 5,000 years ago.
Schoch now believed that the Sphinx must date from before the desert set in, which makes it at least 5 centuries older than the pyramids. To be more sure, he looked 200 yards away at tombs definitely made in the Old Kingdom, around 2500 BC, the same time as the pyramids.
These Old Kingdom tombs are cut out of the exact same layers, the same strata, as is the core body of the Sphinx and the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. They too are weathered, but they're weathered in a very different manner than we saw in the Sphinx enclosure. In the Sphinx enclosure, we have rolling, undulating weathering pattern caused by rain beating down the rock. These rocks were not affected by rainwater to any great extent. They've been weathered primarily by wind and sand abrasion. In fact, this is a classic textbook example of wind weathering. What you get here is a vertical profile, essentially the original vertical profile of the rock after it was carved. You even get hieroglyphic inscriptions that remain on the rock, yet you do have weathering. As the sand and wind whips by it, it picks out the softest layers. It picks them way back and cuts into the rock, but the harder, more competent layers aren't affected very much by the wind and sand, so they jut out. It gives you a very angular weathering profile, quite distinct from what we saw in the Sphinx enclosure.
With the basic theory now supported by a respected geologist that the Sphinx could have been weathered by rainfall, West's expedition searched elsewhere for more detailed confirmation. The temples in front of the Sphinx were made with huge blocks cut away when the statue was carved, so they're the same date. West wanted